Welcome to Real Shame. I'm Adam,
I'm Andy.
and this is a weekly podcast where we go over our movies from our list of shame or movies from our blind spot. So the movie we're talking about this week is The Hustler,
Yep,
and that's a movie that I haven't seen.
I've seen several times.
But before we get into that, let's talk about what we've been watching. Andy, what have you been watching?
What have I been watching? This weekend I watched. Let's see, some eclectic stuff. I watched The Car. You ever heard of that one? 1977
The
horror
Cars?
movie. No, not The Cars, the musical group, but just The Car.
Okay, no.
It's
It's
evil,
not the Pixar movie.
It's not. No. No Pixar movie. It's a really cheesy movie that honestly they used to show a lot on TV when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a perfect movie to watch late at night when you just want to turn your brain off and you want to watch something really stupid because it's really stupid. It's a demonic possessed car.
Not Christy.
Not Christine. It's a demonic possessed car. I don't know, honestly, what kind of make of car it is. It looks almost like I don't even know, like a Rolls Royce or something,
Yeah.
but it's not that. But it shows up in this desert town and just starts running people over. No rhyme
That's
or
cool.
reason. One thing I do like about the movie, although it's silly as all get out, is that they don't ever try and explain why the car is doing what it's doing or why it's possessed or anything like that. There's no driver to the car. They do find that out. It's just a car just driving around, just killing people for no reason. But it's a really, really cheesy and stupid movie, but I recommend watching it at least once. I also watched a movie called The Atomic Cafe, which is a documentary from the early 80s. No narrator in this documentary. It's just comprised of like public education films, and propaganda and things like that from 1940s all the way up until the 50s, and it's all about the atomic bomb. And it is alternately hilarious and horrifying.
It kind of reminds me of there's is it To Live and Die in LA? It's kind of like assembled of clips like that, things that take place in LA. And also, isn't like Reefer Madness also of that kind of ilk where it's
Reefer Madness is older.
Okay.
It's ridiculous because of the effect. Yeah, Reefer Madness is all about the effects that marijuana will have on you, and apparently you'll go insane and you'll jump out windows and whatever else they do in Reefer Madness. But in this, ducking and covering is going to protect you from the atomic bomb, and
which it does.
It does. It's according to the little turtle guy in the cartoon that they show. Yeah,
or Maytag refrigerators for those Indiana Jones and Kingdom of Crystal Skull fans.
Exactly, but it's a funny movie, and again, I mean, it's funny to see kind of what they believed or what they thought back then, and a lot of it is quite frankly propaganda. But it's a pretty funny film. I watched. I did watch the first episode of the new Amazon show. Is it Hunters? Where they're the
Al
Nazi
Pacino
hunters?
one. I thought this on is it Amazon, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I thought you said Netflix for a second.
Yeah.
Amazon,
And I didn't like the first episode at all.
I've heard not good things about it.
I didn't like the first episode.
I hear it's like the tone's strange. Like it's kind of it's more comedic and.
Yes, it is. Which I kind of got that from the preview, and I was already kind of like, how are they gonna go with this show? But yeah, I didn't particularly like that. Al Pacino, he's Al Pacino, right?
Yeah.
And this time it's Al Pacino doing an accent.
What's the accent?
I guess it's Polish or German or something. I honestly, I'm not sure. Another thing that bugs me, and I've talked to you about this before, I don't like. It's not that they use anachronistic music, but they have anachronistic dialogue. They say things I can't remember the specific examples, but they say things in the dialogue that's stuff that they did not say back in the 70s.
Interesting.
And that always takes me out of whatever movie or television show I'm watching. But finally, Hunters aside, I watched Jason and the Argonauts, which is a great classic Ray Harryhausen special effects.
I've seen clips of that, but I'm not sure if I've seen that one.
It
might
good.
Be a good one to
it's got great special effects. For their time, you have to view it. Obviously from the time period, but a lot of stop motion. But again, that's another movie that they showed on TV when I was a kid. I just thought it was fun. So yeah, I watched that. What do you watch?
Cool. Two things I really want to call out. One is they're both Netflix shows, and one we talked about a little bit. But one is a show that I will drop anything that I'm watching and watch immediately as soon as the episodes drop.
Okay.
And the show is The Chef Show. Are you familiar with The Chef Show?
No.
Are you familiar with the movie Chef?
Yes, with Jon Favreau.
Jon
Although
Favreau.
I've not seen it.
Oh, okay. So for the movie Chef, Jon Favreau worked with a chef named Roy Choi, who actually started a food truck, and that was kind of his claim to fame before he started building restaurants. And Jon Favreau got introduced to these food trucks by Gwyneth Paltrow when she was working on either Iron Man or Iron Man 2.
Okay.
So he worked with him to get down the chef skills, because I think through a conversation with him, they found out that, no movie about chefs are accurate enough, or they don't do the food stuff right. So Jon Favreau's like, all right, I'm going to do this right. And Roy Choi, I'm going to be your apprentice and learn how to do this.
Okay.
So did Chef. I enjoy Chef. I think it's a fun movie. It's just fun seeing him have, fun of while they're making a movie. You can tell there's a lot of pleasantries behind the movie. And so with that, there's a spinoff now on Netflix, and they have 3 seasons, and it's called The Chef Show.
Chef Show.
And you have Jon Favreau and Roy Choi, and they're either talking to celebrities or they're talking to other restaurant chefs, and they're making different cuisines. It follows the normal format of a typical cooking show. They'll cook like 3 or 4 different meals for the show and show you the ingredients. And they don't really do it where, like on HGTV or Food Network nowadays, where they actually break down the proportions of the ingredients. It's more, you're kind of learning what goes in it, but not really how to exactly replicate what they're making. But it is infinitely enjoyable watching these 2 guys just interact with each other. It is just so fun. You can tell they're having a lot of fun. You can tell there's like a huge, immense talent behind Roy Choi. I'm hoping I say his name right. There's lots of talent that he has. And, it's just a lot of gravitas in the things he says. And it's just fun watching him interact with people.
Cool.
So it's just one of those happy, fun, lighthearted kind of movies, kind of show that I really enjoy. And as soon as they drop a season, I will just stop what I'm doing and watch all of it. I wholly recommend it if you're into that kind of stuff.
That's high praise.
It's very high praise. The other thing I want to talk about, and we talked about this before the podcast, was Lock and Key. So I devoured Lock and Key this week and watched all 10 episodes of it, and it's also on Netflix.
And was that a good meal or a bad meal you devoured?
I like Lock and Key. I like that kind of mystery and the kind of puzzle solving, and the fact that it's kind of Lovecraftian and it's horror elements and all those kind of like flavors. I really enjoy, if we're going to keep up the cooking metaphor.
Sure.
I think it makes a good soup.
Why not?
So they had me at all these kind of stuff, and it's based off a comic book series written by Joe Hill, who is Stephen King's son.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And Gabriel Rodriguez, I think, is the artist behind it.
Okay.
And he also, I think, contributed to a couple of the storylines. So it's an adaptation of that. And even though I like all the elements and all that stuff, I feel like the show's kind of hit or miss. It's filmed very much like a teen CW kind of drama. Like, we kind of watch the Arrowverse movies a little bit, Arrowverse TV shows a little bit.
Everything's a movie to you today.
Yeah, no, everything's a movie to me. We kind of watch the Arrowverse TV shows a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And, it's kind of like in that vein where it's a little bit of dark, but it's more lighthearted and stuff like that.
Those are definitely corny.
Corny,
I
yeah,
think.
for sure. And I think it would have served better if it was more in this vein of like Stranger Things a little bit. I think Stranger Things skews darker than like the CW kind of shows like Vampire Diaries and Arrow and Flash and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think if it kind of skewed a little bit darker and was more adult with the way it was presenting it, it would have done a lot better for me. But I enjoyed the story, and it made me want to pick up the comic book and read and kind of know how the comic book does things. And there's a lot of mythology there that I think is really interesting. And the premise of the show is that these kids move back into this house called the Key House. And inside Key House are a bunch of different magical keys that open various doors or various things, and those things will do magical stuff. So one is like a doorway into like a mirror dimension kind of thing, or another one is like a cabinet that does different things. So it's kind of this kind of stuff. So the kids are kind of discovering all these keys and discovering what they do and stuff like that. So I think it's very cool and very interesting.
Cool.
So those are the 2 shows that I wanted to call out and what we've been watching.
All righty. Well, I guess that we can move on into the feature film that we're going to talk about this week. It is The Hustler
Hustler.
from 1961. Yeah, not The Hustle.
I feel like I'm wondering if I said Hustlers in the beginning.
Maybe, yeah. So it's not Hustler.
That's not
What's
Hustlers.
Hustlers is the Jennifer Lopez movie with Cardi B and whatnot. And then there's The Hustle.
I don't know who Whatnot is.
With there's The Hustle with Anne Hathaway and Rebel Wilson. And I was gonna make a bad joke in that I noticed that 98%. The Hustler is 98% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, and I was gonna say the other 2% must have seen The Hustle.
That's true.
With Anne Hathaway and Rebel Wilson. I can't stand Rebel Wilson. I haven't seen The Hustle, but from what I understand, it's just Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and not nearly as good. So anyway, The Hustler. That's what we're here to talk about. Not The Hustle, not Hustlers, not The Hustle with Dr. Dre and Ed Lover. No, that's another film that I saw.
Not Hustle and Flow.
Not Hustle and Flow. None of those. We're going to talk about The Hustler, 1961. How many times am I going to say the name? Oh, what's the over-under on how many times we're going to say the word balls in this episode?
I think 20.
Going with the gambling. I don't know.
9 ball?
Let's find out.
Bourbon, JTS Brown.
2. I'm buying.
Thought you only drank milk.
Only when I work.
Yeah, why?
I like it. It's good for you. Besides, you start drinking whiskey gambling, gives you an excuse for losing. That's something you don't need, is an excuse for losing. How'd you make out in the poker game?
I lost $20.
Well, poker's not your game.
What is?
Pool.
You being cute?
I don't think there's a pool player alive shoots better pool than I saw you shoot the other night at Ames. You got talent.
So I got talent. So what beat me?
Character.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You're damn right, I'm sure.
But you can't talk about The Hustler without talking about some pool balls and object balls and cue balls. So Robert Rosen was the director of this film. Before he made this film, he had a pretty good career. He made All the King's Men in 1949, which won Best Picture. I think Best Actor went to Broderick Crawford. Best Supporting Actress was Mercedes McCambridge. But unfortunately, when the 50s rolled around, the communist Red Scare kind of thing was in full effect in Hollywood, McCarthyism. Yeah. And he was called to testify because he apparently was affiliated with the Communist Party in the 30s. He was called to testify before the House Un-American Activities, or HUAC, or HUAC, where HUAC is always the acronym that they use for that. HUAC. He was called to testify before HUAC, and he refused to cooperate. He refused to name names. He pleaded the fifth. And when you did that in those days, you were blacklisted. Yeah. So he found it very difficult to find work after that. And he couldn't not work, right? I mean, he was driving him crazy. So he ended up going back before HUAC. And this time he named names and, named colleagues and stuff. So, of course, that didn't win him any friends, but it enabled him to work again. He came out with The Hustler. It's from a novel by Walter Tevis. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. Walter Tevis wrote The Hustler. He also wrote The Color of Money, which we're going to talk about in another episode. Yep. And apparently The Color of Money book, it bears very little resemblance to what's actually in the movie.
That's what I heard too.
And he also wrote, oddly enough, The Man Who Fell to Earth, which if you've ever seen that movie with David Bowie, directed by Nicholas Roeg, which The Hustler and Man Who Fell to Earth are worlds apart. Yeah, they're very different, but I was surprised to find that he had written that. But anyways, Rosen came out with The Hustler in 1961. He only did one other film after this in 1964 with Warren Beatty called Lilith. And then unfortunately he passed away. He wasn't too old. I think he was in his 50s. But who knows? The whole McCarthyism and all that stuff may have taken a toll on him. They say that some of this film was maybe partially autobiographical. He co-wrote it with another guy, Sidney Carroll, because it depicts a guy who kind of sells himself out in order to win, and that could be construed as maybe a parallel to him kind of selling his friends out and kind of selling a piece of his soul in order to obtain freedom from being blacklisted. I've seen this film, a handful of times, but of course I watched it anew. I still enjoy the film. We talked about this a little bit earlier. It's a lot slower than I remember it. Like, yes, it's very slow. But I do still enjoy it, and again, I think a lot of that kind of carries over from when I was watching it when I was younger. my friends and I used to watch this film, and we always thought it was just a very cool movie. It's a very depressing movie. Yeah. This is not a happy movie. Nobody in the movie is really all that likable, to be honest with you. I mean, probably the most likable character is either Sarah, the girl that he falls in love with, or his partner, manager, Charlie, or what, Minnesota Fats, you think?
No, I'd say Paul Newman.
You think he's the most likable character?
I do.
I don't know.
But maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit.
Well, I mean, obviously, you can't loathe his character. Yeah. You have to get behind him. But as I was watching this, I was reminded of a film that we saw recently, which is Uncut Gems. Because in Uncut Gems, Adam Sandler's character just makes poor decision after poor decision after poor decision, and you're cringing the whole time he's doing all this. And I felt the same way. Of course, I know where the story's headed, right? I've seen The Hustler before. So I know at the beginning he's going to go up big against Minnesota Fats, and then he's going to lose it all because he just gets too drunk and they've stayed up and he just doesn't know when to quit. And then, of course, the rest of the film, or the kind of the middle of the film, midsection of the film, is all about him finding another person who is just as lost and wandering and aimless as he is. They kind of share this Days of Wine and Roses light kind of romance where they're basically just sitting around drinking. He's still going out. He doesn't have his manager or partner, Charlie, anymore. So he's still going out and trying to hustle on his own, which ends badly for him when he gets his thumbs broken because he's too cocky. And then finally, he winds back up at the end of the film after, there's a lot more to it than that, but he winds back up at the end of the film facing Minnesota Fats again. This time he beats him, but does he really win? I don't think so, right? Yeah. I mean, because of everything that he's lost throughout the film, he's still a loser, quite frankly. Yeah. So, all right, what do you think?
It's interesting that you said that. So, So, I was going to ask you what the over/under is on me hating this movie.
I hope you didn't hate it, but I get the sense that you didn't like it that much.
No, I like the movie.
Oh great! It's yes, awesome. I'm happy to be wrong. I'm happy to be wrong.
Not to spoil Color of Money, though. I like Color of Money a little more.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But we'll get.
I don't agree, but that's certainly an interesting take. Yeah, that's certainly an interesting take.
So for me, it's interesting that you said that because I think Paul Newman's character, Fast Eddie, is infinitely likable.
Okay.
He's affable, and just every time I see him on the screen, I just enjoy it. And it's interesting because I felt like when he was losing and all that stuff, like to Minnesota Fats, mm-hmm. I felt like that was actually part of like the hero's journey a little bit. So I never saw him as like I saw him more of as an underdog, not as like a low life kind of person.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting based on your description, like how you were talking about him. But I just kind of saw that as like, this is like almost his hero's journey. And he's this kind of underdog. And yeah, he's doing things that are, despicable. I guess maybe gambling's illegal in these things. But, to me, I just, I thought of him as maybe more like an anti-hero, even if that. But I thought of him as just a normal, protagonist of a movie that you kind of watch.
Gotcha.
For that. So I really enjoyed it. Like you said, the pacing was the biggest thing that kind of stood out to me. And there's some parts where it felt very slow and languid, and the camera would move and shift very slowly. But overall, I really enjoyed the movie, and I thought it was very interesting the way it was shot. Some of the camera work was done mm-hmm. very well with this, and very deliberate with the camera work. And you talked a little bit about Sarah's likable person. Sarah's probably the person I like the least of the whole movie.
Well, but I see her as being very, very sympathetic. I mean, I felt bad for her, the circumstances that she has in life.
But I feel like it's interesting because I feel like she makes those choices. Like, there's nothing in her life that she would do differently. Like, she wants to drink all day. She goes to that cafe. I don't feel like the movie puts it in the way that she's struggling at all. I think this is how she wants to live her life.
Maybe
and when he brings her on the road, that's what shifts, and that kind of what leads to her demise at the end. No spoiler alert. Yeah. But I think,
if you haven't seen it by now, too bad. We're going to spoil it.
But I think that's the way she wants to live her life, is going to college a couple days a week and drinking all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that, but I still, I don't know. Compared to everybody else in the film, and again, I'm certainly not making any judgment on gambling or anything like that. They're free to do whatever they want, but they're hustlers, right? I mean, they're trying to cheat people out of money. They go. It's one thing to go into a pool hall and play Minnesota Fats and be on kind of a level playing field. He knows that they're there to try and take his money and vice versa. But before that scene, the opening scene of the movie, they hustle Vincent Gardenia. Poor Vincent Gardenia plays the bartender. He's more well known probably as Mr. Mushnick in Little Shop of Horrors. But they con him, right? He bets on, you can't make that shot or whatever. I mean, these guys are taking people's money, right? So they're not exactly saints. Yeah. At least Sarah's not doing that. Yeah, she has made that choice to go to college part-time and to drink or whatever. But I think it's implied that, and I didn't really notice this, but I think it's implied that when he does get his thumbs broken and she kind of has to take care for him, she kind of sobers up some. It's only when he's still going out there and playing pool, when he's devoting time to her at the apartment or whatever that they share, I don't think she drinks as much. I think it's more of a choice that she makes whenever she doesn't have somebody in her life. And once, she finally falls in love with him. And by the way, I love one thing about this film. I love the dialogue, even in the parts maybe where the movie's slow. I love a lot of the lines that they say. And poor Sarah, I love when she says, "I love you, Eddie," at the picnic. And he's just like, "Do you need the words?" I was like, oh, that's cold. But I expect that from Eddie Felson. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway.
It's interesting that you say that because I never felt, I guess they are hustlers, right? So they are taking advantage of people. But I felt like everyone was gambling willingly. So to me, that kind of lessened
Again, the gambling thing is fine, and everybody is gambling willingly. But it's when they deliberately go into a bar and pretend like, I mean, they're sharking people, right? I mean, they're deliberately misleading them into thinking that he sucks at pool or whatever, and then he takes his money and whatever. So, it's not the end of, they're not murdering people, so I mean, it's not that bad. But
so there's two things that I want us to talk about.
Okay.
One is, so we kind of talked a little bit, and we both played pool growing up to varying degrees or for different ways. This doesn't look like any pool that I ever played growing up. So you did a little bit more about it than I do.
And I honestly, I've never played. What they're playing in the Hustler is straight pool. They don't play 8-ball and they don't play 9-ball. They play 9-ball a heck of a lot in The Color of Money because it's all about 9-ball and 9-ball tournaments. But in this, they play straight pool, which I've actually never played. But straight pool is a game where you're playing for points, and each object ball that you make in is worth a point. It's sometimes known as like 14.1 continuous pool, but basically you rack the 15 balls. There we go. You rack the 15 balls, you break, and the break counts as a shot. You're still trying to make something in on the break, otherwise you might foul. So you do that, and as long as you make a ball that you call, and you're calling ball in pocket, you make a ball, you keep shooting until you miss. And every time you hit an object ball in, that scores a point. Well, when there's only one ball, so the 8-ball is meaningless in this. It's just the same as any other ball. It's not like 8-ball or 9-ball. So you shoot all these balls, and when there's one object ball left to be hit, you rack the remaining 14 balls without something at the top of the pyramid. So there's one ball missing because that ball's still on the table for you to shoot. And if that ball happens to fall into the rack zone, you've got to move it. There's some special rules that define, or if the cue ball's in the rack zone, you have to move that. There's, again, special rules that define what you do in those circumstances. But you rack the remaining 14 balls and you start all over again. You just keep going. So it's continuous, right? Otherwise, if you shot all 15 balls in and then re-racked, it's almost like you're starting a new game. So they try and make it continuous like that.
So the end goal is certain number of points at the end of X number of rounds, or are you trying to hit a point total and then it ends?
Well, you're trying. Yeah, typically you play to like 100 or 125 points. That's a match. So you might play. I mean, at the beginning scene they play like all night. They play for 24 hours or something like that. They play all day. So they're playing multiple matches. And Eddie, of course, gets up big, as we know, but then he refuses to quit until basically Minnesota Fats concedes and says, okay, you're the best, which he's not going to do because he's got Burt Gordon, played by George C. Scott, staking him.
Yeah.
And so Eddie continues to get drunker and more disheveled and more tired and can't think and refuses to quit. And so that leads to him losing all that money that he won.
But then George C. Scott takes him under the wing.
George C. Scott takes him under his wing. So what did you think about George C. Scott? What did you think about all the performances in the film?
I thought they were really good. The one that stuck out to me that was most grating to me was Sarah's.
Okay.
I don't. She plays someone who's drunk, very interesting, and I don't know much of her body of work, and I feel like the way she talks is very. It just kind of took me out of the movie, like because I spent a lot of time analyzing like why is she talking this way rather than just enjoying the performance, and I don't know if that was a choice she made because of she was trying to play someone who's drunk, or if that was just the way she talks.
Yeah, I think it's hard to play drunk.
Yeah.
I know it's hard to play drunk, but
and I don't know if this is also like a late '60s kind of I feel like these older movies, they act more elevated. They don't play it as realistic as they do in modern cinema.
Right.
So I don't know if it's a more elevated way of kind of talking about or elevating way of performing this her character and stuff like that. So I didn't know where that cut was, and I didn't know how to take it.
Yeah, I don't have many issues with her performance, but I can see where you would say that's probably the weakest performance. I honestly, despite the fact that he is the most unlikable character probably in the movie, I think George C. Scott is the best actor in this film. Honestly, I do. And despite the fact that he, again, is a sleazebag,
Yeah.
I enjoyed every minute that he's on screen. And I enjoy a lot of the things that he says, the dialogue that he says. He continually calls Eddie a born loser.
Yeah.
But I was like, yeah, he is a born. No, I dig George C. Scott's performance in the movie. And again, they have this interplay between when Eddie's smoking and drinking at the bar. George C. Scott's like, saying all these horrible things to him. And then he finally looks at him. He says, "Do you mind if I ask you something personal or whatever?" And Paul Newman's just like, "Well, what have you been up till now?" I mean, geez, he's a terrible person, but he's a great actor. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this, and so was Jackie Gleason was nominated. Although Jackie Gleason has far less screen time than George C. Scott. Piper Laurie actually was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, I believe, and Paul Newman was nominated for Best Actor. None of those people won.
Interesting.
Robert Rosen was nominated for Best Director. The movie was nominated for Best Picture. Did not win. It got 9 nominations total. It only won 2 of those. And I didn't realize this, and I consider myself an Academy Awards aficionado. Back in those days, because there was a pretty equal number of black and white films and color films, they actually separated like art direction and set decoration. They had an award for black and white films. They had an award for color films. It was nominated for art direction, set direction, and it won for black and white. And it was nominated for, what else here? Costume design. Or no, I'm sorry, cinematography, black and white. And it won for that.
Interesting. Because, The Graduate came out 2 years after this movie.
6 years.
Was it 6 years? No, I thought it was filmed in the 60s.
Yeah, so this is 61, Graduate 67.
Oh, for some reason I thought this movie was 67. Never mind.
No, this is 61.
So yeah, I did notice that there was, obviously it was black and white.
Yeah.
And I was wondering
I hope you did.
I was wondering about when they made the transitions. So.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Sarah's death because I thought that was, and talking about The Graduate, I also felt like that kind of came out of left field a little bit.
Yeah, it does. It's weird.
Yeah. So what do you think led her to? She killed herself.
Kills
right?
herself. Yeah. I think she had just been worn down. She's worn down by the lifestyle that she has. She meets somebody that she falls in love with. Finally, she's happy. Then she feels like he's going to leave her because at first he's like, I'm going to go to Louisville. I'm sorry, people from Louisville. I'm going to Louisville, Kentucky, to the Kentucky Derby and to gamble and to play this guy Finley. And I'm leaving you here. And she's afraid that he's not going to come back. Well, she basically forces him to take her with him. And the whole time, Bert is saying mean things both to her and to him. And I think she just finally realizes she's never going to have him. He's always going to want to, kind of be a drifter or want that allure of the hustle, wants to go out and do this. He could play homesteader with her as long as he didn't have any money. But now that he's finally starting to get back out there on the road and hustling and he's got somebody staking him, even though he's taking 75% of the winnings, Paul Newman Fast Eddie is only getting 25%. I think that she just realizes she's not wanted. And that final night, obviously, George C. Scott, Burt Gordon, he must have come on to her at the party. He whispers something to her. She throws her drink in his face. And so that makes her feel cheap. And then she goes back to the hotel, and then he ends up, she gets a drink from him. And I think that she has just kind of spiraled into, but it is a little sudden. I do agree with that. But I think that's kind of how they meant for it to be, I hope. Yeah. My interpretation.
No, I totally get that.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say, or one of the other things I was going to say was, so we talked about straight pool. When he goes to Louisville, first of all, the guy, I don't know if you noticed, but the guy, speaking of The Graduate, the guy that he plays, the game that they're playing is 3-cushion billiards. And the guy he's playing, Finley, is Mr. Robinson in The Graduate. Murray Hamilton is the actor's name.
Yeah, he looks very familiar to me.
Yeah, so that's the guy that he's playing 3-cushion billiards. And 3-cushion billiards, Eddie has never played before in the movie. And at first he loses at that game, but then he starts to get the hang of it, and he gets better. The object of that, in case you were wondering, is, so there's 3 balls on the table, 2 cue balls, and a neutral ball. The neutral ball is red. It's almost always red. The other cue balls, I think in the movie they're both white. Nowadays they usually have a white one and a yellow one. But back in the day they had 2 white balls, 2 white cue balls, and one of them had like a mark on it to distinguish from the other. So if you and I were playing, one of the cue balls would be yours, and it would always be yours. We would never swap or anything. That would never change. And I would take the other cue ball. Your objective is to take your cue ball, hit both of the other object balls at least once, and hit cushions at least 3 times in a single shot. And you get points, I think, for doing all of those things.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I watched some YouTube video, because again, I've never in my life played 3-cushion billiards, but I'd seen it played. Obviously, I've seen it played in this movie before, but I'd never really understood the rules for it. So I looked it up. I thought it was kind of interesting. I'd love to try it sometime, but I don't know that I will find that opportunity. But it seemed pretty cool to me.
So one thing I wanted to call out to that I thought was a little weird a little strange to me was how Fast Eddie got his thumbs broken.
Okay.
That was an interesting way to that presented.
It looks like they're doing something else to him.
It totally looks like they were doing. Was something I called Kirby in here to look at, because I was like, "What is going on?"
I have watched this movie with people, and they're like, "Are they?" And I'm like, "No," because again, I've seen it, so I have the advantage of knowing that's not what they're doing. Yeah. But it does look like that. And I thought, gosh, that's a funny way to teach pool hustlers not to come in there. But no, that's not. That's not. And I, as I saw that scene this time, I was wondering what you would think about what they were doing. Yeah,
it caught me very off guard.
Yes,
and it's such a weird way to present someone getting his thumbs broke. And the other thing is you don't know what happens to him until the next scene,
right? When
he has like the cast on his arms. So you're like, what happened? Maybe that was what the director was trying to do, was add some mystery, and thought maybe he got stabbed or by not showing it, but it was
he was like, this is what they did to me at whack. I don't know.
So yeah, that was very, very unusual, and it was
So this movie, first of all, I just want to point out this movie probably should never have happened, because if you notice at the very beginning when they go into, I think it's Ames Pool Hall to play Minnesota Fats, there's a sign right there at the front that says no gambling allowed. Gambling. Yeah. So this movie should never have happened. They should never have gambled. But in that introductory scene, or when he first plays Minnesota Fats, one of the guys, actually the guy that holds the stake money, is Willie, because that is Willie Mosconi, who is was a famous pool player who won all kinds of championships and tournaments. At the time, he actually held the record for the number of object balls pocketed in a game of straight pool. Well, just straight. 526 balls in a row. And that record stood until last year. Somebody broke it just last year. It stood for 65 years.
That's crazy.
Yes. They did 626, but they did 100 more. They did 626 balls last year.
Wow.
But he did 526 back in the 50s. But he's the guy holding the stake money. And there's actually a poster
of him.
That says Willie Moscone on the pool hall wall. Yeah,
Interesting.
So it's kind of a little meta thing.
And
Also, Jake LaMotta's in this movie. I don't know if you saw him. He's the bartender when Paul Newman meets Sarah, Piper Laurie's character, in the bus station. Later on, that he sees her again at the bar. He's the bartender at that bar. He has a few lines.
Yeah.
Willie Moscone has no lines in the movie. You just see him.
And Color Money also, they pull professional
Yes, they
athletes.
do have some professional players in that.
And I thought him living out of the bus terminal was very cool, and also something like that won't happen today. Like nowadays, like it's one of those things. Like when we watch some of these older movies, when you see scenes at airports, like especially with kicking and screaming, and you see any public transportation now with everything that's happened.
It's very different today.
It's
right?
very different.
Very different.
But I thought that's very cool that he has a bag and he just changes clothes and uses his the bus terminal as his home base. I thought it was a very, very interesting way of doing that.
Right. Jackie Gleason, who plays Minnesota Fats, I think does a wonderful job, even though he's not in the movie, honestly, a lot. But I think he has a lot of presence with the way that he plays that role. He's just very... And the thing that I really like about his performance in this movie is that he's not funny at all. And Jackie Gleason is probably known more for comedic stuff than anything. If you were to ask somebody on the street, provided they knew who Jackie Gleason was, which probably a lot of people wouldn't, but if you were to ask somebody on the street, what role do you find synonymous with Jackie Gleason, they would probably say either Ralph Cramden from The Honeymooners, or they would say Buford T. Justice from the Smokey and the Bandit films, the sheriff in the
moon, Alice.
Yeah, so I mean, either one of those roles, but in this he plays it very, very straight, and I think it's a nice change of pace for him. He was actually alive when they did The Color of Money and was almost in it, but he ultimately did not appear in that film.
Yeah, I think it's because they did some script changes from the book.
Yes,
and probably excluded him.
Apparently, quite a lot.
But overall, I thought this movie was very enjoyable. Nothing really jumped out at me as like one person acting better than everyone else. It was just a good watch, just enjoyable to sit and watch this thing happen in front of me. And I think Paul Newman's very affable and likable, and even when he's playing a rogue or a scoundrel, I was in it and wanted to see him succeed.
I agree. He has a lot of screen presence. I've seen him in a lot of films, and even the poor films that he's in are still watchable, I think, mainly because of him. I think young Robert Redford or young Marlon Brando is very much the same way. Old Marlon Brando, not so much. He's just a cartoon. But young Marlon Brando...
He's a porpoise with a ice bucket on his head.
Yeah, he's giant and refused to learn lines and did all kinds of other crazy things. But yeah, young Marlon Brando I find fascinating to watch, because I always thought Marlon Brando was, probably the best actor of his generation.
Yeah,
he was really, really, I feel like, a naturalistic actor. And most of the movies that I've seen him in, when he was younger at least, he just acts so effortlessly. And I think Paul Newman has a lot of that same.
I don't know if I've seen any of young Marlon Brando movies.
Well,
I haven't seen Streetcar for sure.
You should. Well, and I think that's on your list somewhere down there. But yeah, definitely, because just seeing the Superman Marlon Brando or the Island of Dr. Moreau Marlon Brando or whatever, he fell so far from what he once was. It's a shame.
So that's all I have to talk about the movie. Is there anything else you want to call out before we start wrapping this up?
I don't think so. I think that about covers it.
So stay tuned. Next time
we're
going to talk about, we've already talked about it, The Color of Money.
Color of Money, the sequel, which came out a quarter century later, after it came out in 1986. So big gap.
So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Please shoot us an email, realshame@gmail.com. Look for us on YouTube, Real Shame, or follow the podcast through any of your podcast hosts. And we will talk to you next time. Thank you.